Hello, my name is Dr. A.J. Coomer, PhD, he, him. I am the smartest mathematician who has ever lived. I recently, or not recently, the last couple months have started reading Euclid's Elements, and I want to do deep dives into the history of math and gonna do a lot of Greek math. And so we're gonna do Euclid, Apollonius, and Archimedes, and then we'll move on from there. So I have the guy who is the authority in the English language for Greek mathematics is this guy, Thomas Little Heath. And all of his work is in the public domain. He did the English language translation of Euclid. I'm reading probably a slight edit of Heath's translation, which is just from some dude's website, and just because what we're going to see is Heath provides a lot of commentary. So this is 1896. He provides a lot of commentary, and just kind of reading straight words is not good. Content it just doesn't work as well in the video format. It works, and so if it's just me trying to decipher math, then that works pretty well. But just kind of reading words doesn't work as well. So that's why I was doing. That's why I wasn't just reading a book, because it's 150 pages before we actually get to a single proposition in Euclid. But there doesn't appear to be a similar thing for Apollonius or Archimedes' work. So I'm just gonna try reading straight out of the book. So that's what this is. Let's get started with Apollonius's Treatise on Conics. All right, this is the preface. So this book, you can just get it off the Internet Archive. There will be a link to it down below. Okay, so it is not too much to say. Let's make this bigger. How do I make this bigger? This is like literally a scan of a physical book. It is not too much to say that to the great majority of mathematicians at the present time, Apollonius is nothing more than a name, and his Conics, for all practical purposes, is a book unknown. So, Apollonius, Archimedes, Euclid, there are other figures in Greek geometry, but those are kind of the big ones that come to mind. Aristotle would come to mind, Plato, Pythagoras. But I think that the towering figures are Euclid, Archimedes, and Apollonius, if you had to pick three. If you had to pick the sort of Mount Rushmore of mathematicians, it would be Euclid, Archimedes, Apollonius, maybe Aristotle, then Descartes, Fermat, Newton, Euler, Cauchy, Gauss. There's too many. That's too many faces. Anyway. Okay, well, there were only like 20 presidents at the time, Mount Rushmore, and there's way more mathematicians, so it's not really fair. Anyway, it's not too much to say that to the great majority of mathematicians at the present time, Apollonius is nothing more than a name, and his Conics, for all practical purposes, is a book unknown. Yet this book, written some 21 centuries ago, contains, in the word of Chasles, the most interesting properties of the Conics, to say nothing of such brilliant Is there a level of zoom between those two? Because this is to, let's try 500%. There. To say nothing of such brilliant investigations as those in which, by purely geometrical means, the author arrives at what amounts to the complete determination of the evolute of any conic. I learned that at some point, what the evolute means. It works for a general curve. Anyway, the general neglect of the great geometer, as he was called by his contemporaries on account of this very work, is all the more remarkable from the contrast which it affords the fate of his predecessor Euclid. For whereas in this country at least the elements of Euclid are still, both as regards their contents and their order, the accepted basis of elementary geometry, the influence of Apollonius upon modern textbooks on conic sections is, so far as form and method are concerned, practically nil. Nor is it hard to find probable reasons for the prevailing absence of knowledge on the subject. In the first place, it could hardly be considered surprising if the average mathematician were apt to show a certain faint-heartedness when confronted with 7 books in Greek or Latin which contain 387 propositions in all, and doubtless the apparently portentous, I don't know that word, portentous, I don't know, bulk of the treatise has deterred many from attempting to make it its acquaintance. Again, the form of the propositions is an additional difficulty, because the reader finds in them none of the ordinary aids toward the comprehension of somewhat complicated geometrical work, such as the conventional appropriation in modern textbooks of definite letters to denote particular points on the various conic sections. On the contrary, Alright, my chair is not cooperating with my back. On the contrary, the enunciations of propositions which, by the aid of a notation once agreed upon, can now be stated in a few lines, were by Apollonius invariably given in words like the enunciations of Euclid. These latter are often sufficiently unwieldy, but the inconvenience is greatly intensified in Apollonius, where the greater complexity of the conceptions entering into the investigation of conics, as compared with the more elementary notions relating to the line and the circle, necessitates in many instances an enumeration extending over a space equal to, say, half a page of this book. Hence, it is often a matter of considerable labor to even grasp the enunciation of a proposition. Further, the propositions are, with the exception that separate paragraphs mark the formal divisions, printed continuously. There are no breaks for the purpose of enabling the eye to take in readily the successive steps of the demonstration, and so facilitating the comprehension of the argument as a whole. There is no uniformity of notation, but in almost every fresh proposition a different letter is employed to denote the same point. What wonder, then, if there are the most serious obstacles in the way of even remembering the results of certain propositions? Nevertheless, these propositions, though unfamiliar to mathematicians of the present day, are of the very essence of Apollonius' system, are being constantly used, and must therefore necessarily... See, I'm just like reading the words, and I kind of like am forgetting, I'm not taking it in. The foregoing remarks refer to the editions where Apollonius can be read in the Greek or in a Latin translation, i.e. to those of Halley and Heiberg. But the only attempt which has been made to give a more complete view of the substance of Apollonius in a form more accessible to the modern reader is open to much the same objections as reproduction of Conics in German by H. Balsam in Berlin in 1861 is a work deserving great praise for both its accuracy and the usefulness of the occasional explanatory notes, but perhaps most of all for an admirable set of figures to the number of 400 at the end of the book. The enunciations of the propositions are, however, still in words. There are few breaks in the continuity of the printing, and the notation is not sufficiently modernized to make the book of any more real service to the ordinary reader than the original editions. An edition, therefore, is still wanted, which shall, while in some places adhering even more closely than Balsam to the original text, at the same time be so entirely remodeled by the aid of accepted modern notation as to be thoroughly readable by any competent mathematician, and this want is the subject of the present work to supply. In setting myself to this task, I made up my mind that any satisfactory reproduction of the conics must fulfill certain essential conditions. 1. It should be Apollonius and nothing but Apollonius. Nothing should be altered either in the substance or in the order of his thought. 2. It should be complete, leaving out nothing of any significance or importance. I need to readjust. 3. It should exhibit under different headings the successive divisions of the subject so that the definite scheme followed by the author may be seen as a whole. Accordingly, I considered it to be the first essential that I should make myself thoroughly familiar with the whole work at first hand, with this object I wrote out a perfectly literal... Okay, so this is like before computers. I wrote out a perfectly literal translation of the whole of the extant 7 books, right? There's 8 books and 7 of them are extant, right? This was a laborious task, but it was not in other respects difficult owing to the excellence of the standard editions. Of these editions, Halley's is a monumental work, beyond praise alike in respect of its design and execution, and for books 5 to 7, it is still the only complete edition. For books 1 to 4, I use for the most part the new Greek text of Heiberg, a scholar who has earned the undying gratitude of all who are interested in the history of Greek mathematics by successively bringing out a critical text with Latin translation of Archimedes of Euclid's Elements into the writings of Apollonius, still extant in Greek. The only drawback to Heiberg's Apollonius is in the figures, which are poor and not seldom even misleading. And not seldom, I don't know what that means. So that I found it a great advantage to have Halley's edition with its admirably executed diagrams before me even well engaged in books 1 to 4. The real difficulty began with the constructive work of rewriting the book, involving as it did the substitution of a new and uniform notation, the condensation of some propositions, the combination of 2 or more into 1, some slight rearrangements of order. How much longer do we have? Okay, a couple more pages. Condensation of some propositions, the combination of 2 or more into 1, some slight rearrangements of order for the purpose of bringing together kindred propositions in cases where their separation was rather a matter of accident than indicative of design, and so on. The result has been, without leaving out anything essential or important, to diminish the bulk of the work by considerably more than 1/2. Okay, so I'm not reading. So I'm just reading it out loud and not, parsing it. So, Jesus Christ. So he did a literal translation and then rewrote it again. Yeah, uniform notation... Right, okay. Doing some slight rearrangements. Okay. Right, without leaving out anything essential, to diminish the bulk of the work by considerably more than 1/2 and to reduce to a corresponding extent the number of separate propositions. When the re-editing of the Conics was finished, it seemed necessary for completeness to prefix an introduction. For the purposes, 1, of showing the relation of Apollonius to his predecessors in the same field, both as regards matter and method, 2, of explaining more fully than was possible in the few notes inserted in square brackets in the body of the book and the mathematical significance of certain portions of the Conics, and the probable connection, that looks like a woke word, between this and other smaller treatises of Apollonius about which we have more information. 3, of describing and illustrating fully the form and language of the propositions as they stand in the original Greek text. The first of these purposes required that I should give a sketch of the history of conic sections up to the time of Apollonius, and I have accordingly considered it worthwhile to make this part of the introduction as far as possible complete. Thus, for instance, in the case of Archimedes, I have collected practically all the propositions in conics to be found in his numerous works, with the substance of the proofs were given, and I hope that the historical sketch as a whole will be found not only more exhaustive for the period covered than any that has yet appeared in English, but also not less interesting than the rest of the book. For the purposes of the earlier history of conics and the chapters of mathematical significance of certain portions of the conics and other smaller treatises of Apollonius, I have been constantly indebted to... God, my chair, because I start slouching. Take a breath. I'm going to take some water. But he's been indebted to H.G. Zoethen, some Nazi words, to which a large extent covers the same ground, though a great portion of his work consisting of mathematical analysis rather than a reproduction of Apollonius is of course here replaced by a re-edited treatise itself. I've also made constant use of Heiberg's more Nazi words and the original Greek of Euclid's Elements, the works of Archimedes, and we're also going to do Archimedes, the Sunagugi, something like that, of Pappus, and the important commentary on Euclid, Book 1 by Proclus. Pappus, I don't know how much we're going to go over Pappus, but Pappus is another guy who's worth going over. The frontispiece to this volume is a reproduction of a quaint picture and attached legend which appeared at the beginning of Halley's edition. The story is told elsewhere than in Vitruvius, but with less point. The quotation on the title page is from a vigorous and inspiring passage in Proclus's commentary on Euclid, Book 1, in which he is describing the scientific purpose of his work and contrasting it with the useless investigations of paltry lemmas, distinctions of cases, and the like, which form the stock in trade of the ordinary Greek commentator. One merit claimed by Proclus for his work, I think I may fairly claim for my own, that it at least contains... Way to show off, you asshole. Ossa pragmateusteron exe theurian. So, pragmate would. All right, so that clearly means, I'm guessing, practice and theory is what that means. And I should indeed be proud of if, in the judgment of competent critics, it should be found possible to apply it to the succeeding phrase. Oh boy. Suntele pros tune tain olane philosophian. Okay, so that clearly means philosophy, but I don't know. Lastly, I wish to express my thanks to my brother, Dr. R.S. I don't care, for his kindness. He's dead now. Who cares? All right, that's the end of the preface. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. We're going to do Archimedes and more of Apollonius as well, because the Archimedes book says that it's a companion volume to this, so might as well read them together.